There is a building on Broadway that has seen more drama, ambition, and tragedy than most places ever will. It stands at the corner of Broadway and 73rd Street on Manhattan's Upper West Side, and its name is the Ansonia. When it opened in 1904, it was the largest residential hotel in the world. At that time, the area around it was still rough and unfinished, with dirt roads, small wooden buildings, and empty land. The Ansonia rose above all of it like a palace built from stone, brick, and decoration meant to impress anyone who looked up at it. This building was not just large, it was bold, almost shocking. And the man who built it was just as extreme. That man was William Earl Dodge Stokes, a wealthy heir from one of New York's richest families. His fortune came from the Phelps-Dodge Copper Empire, a business that stretched across the country and made his family enormously powerful. Stokes believed he could build a perfect world inside one massive building, a place where the rich and famous could live without ever needing to leave. But Stokes was not a calm or honorable man. He was known for scandals, violent behavior, and cruel treatment of the people around him. Some even suspected him of serious crimes. The building he created attracted famous singers, writers, and athletes, but it also pulled in gamblers, criminals, and dangerous figures. Over time, the Ansonia became a place where great success and terrible failure existed side by side. For more than a century, incredible events unfolded inside its walls. Huge fortunes were made and then lost. Violence broke out in rooms and on balconies. A famous baseball championship was secretly rigged inside one of its apartments. The building survived world wars, economic collapse, and long years of neglect. At one point, it came close to being torn down completely. Yet somehow, the Ansonia endured. This is the story of that building, a grand dream built on ambition, excess, and dark secrets, standing like a cursed palace on Broadway.
At the end of the 1800s, the Upper West Side was nothing like it is today. North of 72nd Street, Broadway felt unfinished and forgotten. The streets were uneven and dusty, lined with small houses, boarding rooms, and the occasional bar for workers. Many people thought the area would never become important, but William Earl Dodge Stokes believed the city would grow north, and he wanted to be ready for that future. He imagined luxury living far above the noisy streets, in a building so large and impressive that it would change how people thought about city life. Stokes was born in 1852 into extreme wealth. His grandfather, Anson Green Phelps, helped create a powerful mining business that made the family name famous across America. Even so, William had little interest in running the family company. When his father died in 1881, William fought his own relatives in court over money and control. The legal battle was public and bitter, but it ended with William walking away rich. His share of the inheritance gave him enough money to start fresh and chase his own vision, no matter how risky or expensive it might be. He began by building stylish townhouses on the Upper West Side, learning how real estate worked and gaining confidence. But these buildings were only a warm-up. Stokes wanted something far bigger, something no one could ignore. His personal life at the time was already unstable. In 1895, he married a much younger woman named Rita de Acosta after seeing her photograph and deciding she would be his wife. Their wedding was grand and public, but the marriage itself was unhappy and violent. After years of suffering, Rita divorced him in 1900 and received an enormous settlement, one of the largest ever given at the time. Even before the divorce was final, Stokes had already started planning his greatest project. In 1899, he hired a French architect to design a massive residential hotel inspired by the grand buildings of Paris. But Stokes soon took control of the project himself, changing the plans again and again. The cost quickly exploded far beyond what was expected, but Stokes did not care. He wanted the building to be taller, richer, and more dramatic than anything around it.
The Ansonia was built on an entire city block between 73rd and 74th Streets. Its steel frame rose 17 stories high, making it one of the tallest residential buildings of its time. The outside was covered with stone, white brick, and heavy decoration. Towers rose at the corners, balconies stretched outward, and carved designs covered the walls. When it was finished, the building dominated Broadway completely. Stokes named it after his grandfather, Anson Green Phelps, leaving a permanent mark on the city skyline. The Ansonia had arrived, and with it came a future filled with brilliance, scandal, and disaster. By the start of 1903, people were already moving into the Ansonia, even though construction crews were still at work. Families unpacked their belongings while scaffolding stood outside their windows, and workers hammered late into the evening. On February 13th of that year, the ground floor restaurants opened, offering rich French meals prepared in massive kitchens that filled an entire level of the building. The official opening ceremony came a year later, on April 19, 1904. Newspapers were stunned. One headline described the Ansonia as the largest and most overwhelming residential hotel ever built. Inside were more than 1,400 rooms, grouped into over 300 apartments, all served by 6 passenger elevators that carried residents smoothly upward. Every suite was designed to feel grand, with wide mahogany doors, fresh linens replaced several times a day, and private pantries connected to the main kitchen by dumbwaiters. But to William Earl Dodge Stokes, comfort alone was not enough. He was not building a hotel. He was building a complete world. Stokes believed the Ansonia should function like a city sealed inside stone walls. He wanted residents to live there without ever stepping onto the street below. From the moment tenants arrived, it became clear just how far this idea went. Beneath the building, the basement held a busy underground community. There was a shopping arcade with a butcher, a barber, and a full laundry service. A bakery produced bread every morning. A milk shop sold fresh dairy. A small theater hosted private shows, while cold storage rooms protected valuable fur coats from summer heat. Residents stored jewelry and documents in secure vaults, and one of New York's earliest residential garages allowed automobiles to be parked safely indoors. For a building of its time, this alone was astonishing.
But the true surprise lay even deeper. Below the shops stretched an enormous indoor swimming pool, heated and cleaned by the Ansonia's own power systems. Nearby were Turkish baths, complete with steam rooms and massages. A resident could wake up, eat, bathe, swim, attend a performance, shop, and return home without ever seeing daylight. Above ground, the public spaces were decorated with heavy gold trim, chandeliers, and carved walls inspired by French royal palaces. A massive dining room could seat hundreds for formal meals. Tea rooms and quiet lounges gave guests space to talk, write letters, or simply be seen. Stokes even hired a professional art collector to place hundreds of paintings throughout the building, turning hallways into galleries. The Ansonia was not just luxurious, it was overwhelming by design. The apartments themselves were carefully planned for a specific type of resident. Stokes wanted artists, musicians, and performers to live there. He made doorways wide enough to roll grand pianos through without effort. This was no accident. He understood what creative people needed, and he offered them something incredibly rare for the time: silence. The walls were built thick, sometimes nearly 3 feet deep, not only to prevent fires, but to block sound completely. Singers could rehearse at full volume, pianists could play through the night, neighbors would hear nothing. In an age before soundproofing technology, this level of privacy felt almost unreal. Temperature control added another layer of comfort. Cold brine flowed through pipes hidden inside the walls, keeping the building cool even during brutal New York summers. While the city outside baked and sweated, the Ansonia stayed steady and calm. For opera singers and musicians whose careers depended on their voices and instruments, this was not just pleasant, it was essential. Communication inside the building happened through pneumatic tubes that ran through the walls. Residents sent messages, ordered meals, and contacted staff with notes that zipped through the system day and night. Dumbwaiters delivered fresh food directly to private pantries.
The kitchen below operated on a scale never seen before in a residential building.
The numbers alone sounded unreal. Hundreds of telephones, thousands of electric burners, steam radiators by the thousands, refrigerators in nearly every suite, and more bathrooms than any building in the city. When elevator companies demanded prices Stokes disliked, he created his own company and designed his own machines. Passenger elevators, service elevators, freight elevators, all custom built. One elevator, however, was unlike any other. It was designed to carry livestock. On the roof of the Ansonia, far above Broadway traffic, Stokes created a working farm. Chickens laid eggs that were delivered fresh each morning, goats provided milk, ducks wandered freely. There were even more exotic animals, including a small bear. Stokes's son kept a pig as a pet, letting it roam the rooftop alongside geese with clipped wings. Extra milk and eggs were sold cheaply in the basement shops. To Stokes, this was proof that his idea worked. The Ansonia produced food, power, and comfort all on its own. It did not depend on the city below. Visitors entering the lobby encountered yet another surprise. A large fountain stood at the center of the entrance hall, and inside it swam live seals. They splashed and barked as guests arrived, turning an already strange building into something almost dreamlike. Children loved them. Adults were often unsure what to think. City officials, however, were not impressed. Health inspectors grew increasingly concerned about farm animals living above one of Manhattan's busiest streets. In late 1907, word reached Stokes that an inspection was coming. That night, he and his son quietly removed the animals from the roof. When inspectors arrived the next day, they found nothing. The farm survived a little longer, but not for long. Eventually, city authorities shut it down permanently. The animals were sent away, many to the Central Park Menagerie. The seals in the lobby were removed soon after. By then, the Ansonia's reputation was sealed. It was famous, strange, and unforgettable. Artists and performers filled its halls. Wealthy socialites competed for its largest apartments. And slowly, quietly, another kind of resident began to appear. Men who thrived in shadows rather than spotlight. One of them would soon make the Ansonia part of criminal history.
The building had been open less than 2 years when its most dangerous tenant arrived. In late 1905, a man named Albert James Adams rented a suite near the top floors. He was 60 years old, freshly released from prison, and still incredibly rich. Newspapers called him the Policy King. Judges called him ruthless. Adams had made his fortune running illegal lotteries known as policy games, which targeted the poorest neighborhoods in New York. People bet tiny amounts on 3-digit numbers, hoping for impossible odds. Almost no one won. Adams always did. By the 1890s, his gambling empire reached across the entire city, earning him millions each year. He owned businesses, property, and investments far beyond New York. He lived well and moved among powerful people, but respect never followed him. When a major investigation into police corruption exposed his operation, his protection vanished. Arrests followed. His empire cracked. Prison took part of his life, but not his wealth. Now, free again, Adams chose the Ansonia as his final refuge. He believed its size, luxury, and privacy would protect him. He was wrong. What happened next would turn his apartment into one of the most infamous rooms in New York history and prove that even inside a palace, some men cannot escape their end. In 1901, police finally moved against Albert Adams' gambling empire. Raids shut down his operations across the city, and 2 years later he was convicted and sent to Sing Sing prison. In 1904, Adams asked for early release, claiming good behavior and poor health, but the parole board refused. He served every single day of his sentence, 1 year and 9 months, before walking out of prison a free man.
Publicly, Adams claimed he had changed. In October of 1905, he wrote a letter to the New York Times announcing that he was finished with illegal gambling for good. But the question remained, where could a man like Adams go? His name was still tied to corruption. The police watched him closely. Respectable society wanted nothing to do with him. There was only one place that made sense. He moved into the Ansonia.
William Earl Dodge Stokes welcomed Adams without hesitation. Some accounts suggest Stokes even encouraged him to move in, though no one ever fully explained why. Perhaps Stokes saw a reflection of himself, a powerful outsider shunned by polite society. Or perhaps he simply wanted a wealthy tenant who could afford the rent. Whatever the reason, Adams settled into Suite 1579 and began what he called his retirement. For months, he lived quietly. Reporters waited in the lobby, hoping to spot him. Police tracked his movements, but Adams rarely left the building. His health was failing, his hearing was nearly gone, and his once vast fortune was shrinking fast. The real disaster came from his own family. Adams had trusted his eldest son with a major business investment, pouring millions into a venture that promised great returns. The business collapsed. The money vanished. The man who had built his life by taking small bets from the poor now found himself losing everything. The loss crushed him. On the morning of October 1st, 1906, staff entered Suite 1579 and found Albert Adams dead. He had been shot. A revolver lay nearby. The coroner ruled it a suicide. Adams had taken his own life alone in his luxury apartment, surrounded by wealth he could no longer keep. He was 61 years old. His funeral was held just blocks away, but only a small group attended. Officially, the case was closed. Unofficially, rumors spread through the Ansonia for years. Some believed Adams had enemies who wanted revenge. Others whispered about unpaid debts or darker secrets. A few even questioned whether his host knew more than he admitted. None of these stories were ever proven. The suicide ruling stood. But the damage was done. Less than 2 years after opening, the most luxurious residential hotel in New York was already linked to criminals and scandal. Newspapers loved it. A famous gambling king, fresh from prison, found dead in his private suite. The Ansonia's reputation was sealed, and it would not be the last time violence marked its history. William Earl Dodge Stokes himself would soon add another chapter to the building's growing legend. Stokes had always been drawn to young women, and in February of 1911, he crossed yet another line. Although still legally forbidden to remarry while his first wife was alive, he secretly married a 24-year-old woman named Helen Blanche Elwood. Stokes was 58. The wedding was kept quiet, but secrecy had never truly suited him. At the same time, he was involved with another young woman, a 22-year-old vaudeville performer named Lillian Graham. Graham lived with her friend Ethel Conrad in an apartment a few blocks north of the Ansonia. Stokes began an affair with Lillian and, in a moment of terrible judgment, wrote her passionate love letters. These letters were detailed, personal, and dangerous. If they became public, they could destroy his new marriage and his reputation completely. By early summer, Stokes wanted them back. On the night of June 7, 1911, he went to the women's apartment to retrieve them. What happened next would shock the city. Stokes claimed the women demanded money in exchange for the letters and attacked him when he refused. Graham and Conrad told a very different story. They said Stokes arrived furious, threatened them, and became violent when they would not hand over the letters. What no one disputed was that gunshots echoed through the apartment. Lillian fired first, hitting Stokes in the leg. As he tried to escape, she fired again. Stokes rushed her, grabbed the gun, and used her body as a shield. From across the room, Ethel Conrad fired her own weapon, striking Stokes again. Bleeding badly, he staggered into the hallway. The noise brought neighbors running. 3 Japanese servants living across the hall heard the women screaming that Stokes was trying to kill them. They rushed in and attacked him, beating him until police arrived. By the end of the night, Stokes lay injured and unconscious, while Lillian, Ethel, and the 3 servants were all arrested. Stokes was taken to the hospital with gunshot wounds and severe injuries from the beating.
The newspapers exploded with the story. A millionaire hotel owner shot by two young performers, beaten by servants, all over love letters. It was irresistible. The women were labeled the shooting showgirls, and their trial became a public spectacle. Both claimed self-defense. They said they fired only to protect themselves. The jury agreed. Both women were found not guilty. While waiting for the trial, the women caught the attention of a theater producer who saw opportunity in scandal. He paid their bail and put them on stage as a novelty act. Audiences packed theaters to see the women who had shot a millionaire and walked free. For Stokes, the humiliation was complete. He survived the bullets, survived the beating, and survived the disgrace, but his name was dragged through every paper in the country. His building, even though the shooting happened elsewhere, became tied once again to violence and scandal. Yet life inside the Ansonia barely slowed. Music still floated through the hallways. Rehearsals continued behind thick walls. While the owner battled lawsuits and disgrace, the building itself was becoming something unexpected. It was turning into a sanctuary for artists. By 1908, when a powerful opera manager arrived in New York to lead the Metropolitan Opera, he faced a simple problem: where to live. He chose the Ansonia. Soon, other musicians followed. Word spread quickly. The walls were thick, the apartments were quiet, the temperatures stayed steady year-round. Performers could rehearse without fear of complaints. The Ansonia became a haven. World-famous singers kept apartments there, using the silence to protect their voices. Conductors studied scores late into the night. Composers worked without interruption. What Stokes had built for luxury and control had accidentally become something greater, a palace for music, creativity, and art. While scandal and violence grabbed headlines, inside the Ansonia, something beautiful was taking shape. The building had become a home for the muses, and its most celebrated chapter was just beginning. Many of the greatest musicians of the early 20th century passed through the Ansonia's doors. Igor Stravinsky, whose explosive ballet The Rite of Spring had shocked Paris audiences and sparked riots in 1913, stayed at the building during his visits to New York, grateful for a place where he could work without interruption. Gustav Mahler, the intense and demanding composer and conductor who briefly led both the Metropolitan Opera and the New York Philharmonic, kept an apartment there during his American years. Sergei Rachmaninoff, who had fled Russia after the Bolshevik Revolution, found that the Ansonia's massive walls allowed him to practice his powerful piano works at full force, something nearly impossible anywhere else in the city. Over time, the building became a kind of vertical music school. On any given afternoon, the hallways echoed with sound, though never loudly enough to disturb anyone. A soprano rehearsed Puccini behind one door, a violinist worked through Bach behind another, and somewhere above, a piano thundered through a concerto. The building's strange communication system added another layer to its musical life. The pneumatic tubes that carried notes and meal orders also carried rumors. News of auditions, casting decisions, rivalries, and romances traveled just as fast as written messages. The Ansonia was not simply a place where musicians slept. It was where deals were made, careers were shaped, and reputations were quietly built or destroyed. Some residents took advantage of the soundproofing in ways no one had expected. A famous Danish tenor, known for heroic roles on the opera stage, reportedly used the long hallways for target practice, firing his pistol down the corridor and trusting the thick walls to swallow the noise. Whether his neighbors approved was never recorded, but the story became part of Ansonia legend. The building's size also made it useful for men who lived complicated personal lives. A powerful theater producer kept 2 apartments inside the Ansonia, one for his wife, a celebrated actress, and another for his mistress. The building was so vast that the 2 women never crossed paths. It was, in its own way, the perfect arrangement for a man who made his living selling illusion to the public. Not every musical resident, however, was gifted with true talent. One wealthy socialite believed she was an opera singer despite having a famously poor voice.
She practiced for years inside the Ansonia, protected by walls that spared the rest of the city from her performances. When she eventually gave a public concert in 1944, the event became legendary for all the wrong reasons. The tickets sold out instantly, not because people expected greatness, but because they wanted to witness disaster. The business side of music followed the artists. Powerful managers and promoters kept offices in the building, knowing that anyone serious about a musical career would eventually pass through its halls. Young performers came hoping for introductions, auditions, or advice. By the 1920s, the Ansonia had become the unofficial center of classical music in America. The Metropolitan Opera was close by, Central Park offered peace and fresh air, and inside the building, musicians found everything they needed: privacy, stable temperatures, understanding neighbors, and space to work. Life there was not always peaceful. Artistic egos clashed, old grudges resurfaced. Singers refused to speak to rivals over long-forgotten slights. But the Ansonia absorbed it all. The same walls that blocked sound also softened conflict. Whatever drama unfolded stayed hidden behind closed doors. For William Earl Dodge Stokes, this transformation must have felt like proof that his vision had worked. The city's greatest artists had made his building their home. But Stokes himself was rarely present to enjoy it. Lawsuits, scandals, and financial strain consumed him. The musicians barely noticed. Their lives revolved around rehearsals, performances, and ambition. And somewhere in the building, at every hour of the day, someone was always practicing. While music filled the halls, another kind of star arrived, one who played not to concert crowds, but to packed stadiums. A baseball player would soon make the Ansonia famous in an entirely different way. In the fall of 1919, a small group of men gathered inside one of the Ansonia's suites. They were not artists, they were not tenants looking for comfort. They were baseball players, and they had come to betray the game Americans loved most. These men belonged to the Chicago White Sox, the strongest team in baseball that year. They had won the league championship and were expected to crush the Cincinnati Reds in the World Series. But behind closed doors, several players planned something else entirely. They planned to lose.
The man leading the scheme was the team's first baseman, a tough and bitter player who had grown angry over low pay and broken promises. He had already spoken with gamblers and recruited the team's best pitcher, who felt deeply cheated by the team's owner. Now, inside the Ansonia, he laid out the plan for others. Each man would be paid a huge sum of money in exchange for small mistakes, missed throws, easy pitches, errors at just the right moment. Nothing obvious, just enough to tilt the outcome. The players in that room included some of the finest talent in the sport, men whose names would one day be etched into baseball history. Some agreed immediately. One listened but refused the money. Others hesitated, then gave in. Behind it all stood a powerful New York gambler, a man whose money and influence reached into every corner of the underworld. He never met the players directly, but his cash made the scheme possible. His associates handled the details. His betting network stood ready to profit. When the World Series began on October 1, 1919, crowds gathered not only in stadiums but inside the Ansonia itself. A large board in the lobby tracked the game as reports arrived by telegraph. A signal had been arranged. The pitcher was supposed to hit the first batter he faced, proving the fix was real. When that batter was struck by the pitch, the gambler watching in the lobby knew everything was in motion. He quietly left the building, confident the outcome was secured. The series ended quickly. Cincinnati won. The supposedly unbeatable White Sox collapsed just enough to lose without raising immediate alarms. But suspicions spread fast. Betting patterns looked strange. Errors seemed too perfectly timed. Pitches came at moments when they should not have. Sports writers began asking questions. Fans whispered. For nearly a year, the truth stayed buried. Then, in 1920, a grand jury investigation uncovered everything. One player confessed, Others followed. The scandal exploded across the nation. America learned that its championship had been sold and that the betrayal had been planned inside a luxury suite at the Ansonia Hotel. The building's legend grew darker still. Once again, it was not music or beauty that captured headlines, but corruption, secrecy, and disgrace.
8 players were formally charged with conspiracy to cheat the public. From that moment on, they were known as the Black Sox, a name that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Even though several of them had confessed, all 8 were found not guilty in court in August of 1921. The reason was almost unbelievable. The most important evidence had vanished. Documents disappeared. Signed statements were gone. Many people suspected that powerful gamblers had stepped in to make sure the proof never reached the jury. Whether that was true or not no longer mattered. The very next day, baseball's new commissioner, Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, delivered a ruling that changed sports history. He banned all 8 players from professional baseball for life. No appeals, no exceptions. Even one player who had refused the bribe and played his heart out during the series was expelled. His crime was silence. He knew about the fix and failed to report it. The punishment nearly destroyed the sport. Fans felt betrayed, attendance dropped, trust vanished. Baseball, once seen as pure and honest, suddenly looked rotten at its core. The game needed redemption. It needed a new hero, someone so powerful and exciting that people could believe again. And in the spring of 1920, that hero moved into the Ansonia. That hero was Babe Ruth. In January of 1920, the owner of the Boston Red Sox made what many still consider the worst decision in American sports history. Deep in debt, he sold his greatest player to the New York Yankees for cash and a loan secured against his own stadium. The man he sold was George Herman Ruth, a 24-year-old pitcher who had recently discovered he could hit baseballs farther than anyone alive. When Ruth arrived in New York, he needed a place to live. He chose the Ansonia. The building fit him perfectly. The apartments were large enough for his growing fame and his growing waistline. The thick walls meant he could come home late without disturbing anyone. The basement barber shop kept him camera ready, and the building staff handled the constant flow of fans and autograph seekers. Ruth settled in quickly. On game days, he often wandered the hallways in a bright silk robe, joking with bellhops and collecting his mail like he owned the place. No one found this strange. The Ansonia had seen seals in its lobby. A baseball star in a robe barely registered.
From his apartment on Broadway, Ruth would drive to the ballpark, ignoring traffic rules with cheerful confidence. Fans gathered just to watch him arrive. That first season as a Yankee, he shattered records. He hit more home runs than some entire teams. The Yankees, once an afterthought, became the most exciting attraction in sports. Crowds flooded the stadium. Newspapers followed Ruth everywhere. Children who had never seen a game knew his name. In a world without television or social media, Babe Ruth became the most famous person in America simply by being himself. The Ansonia witnessed it all. The parties, the visitors, the late nights. The building's privacy protected him. Whatever happened behind his door stayed there. Inspired by the musicians around him, Ruth even tried learning the saxophone. The results were loud and terrible, but the thick walls spared his neighbors. Meanwhile, back in Boston, the Red Sox began a long collapse that would last nearly a century. Writers later called it the curse of the Bambino. Whether it was superstition or simple mismanagement, one thing was certain: Babe Ruth changed baseball forever, and his first home as a Yankee was the Ansonia. By the time Ruth was transforming sports history, the man who built the Ansonia was fading. William Earl Dodge Stokes was still alive, but barely. His health was failing. His fortune was shrinking. His life had become a battlefield of lawsuits and public humiliation. He would not live to see what his building would become. By the early 1920s, Stokes was under siege. His second marriage collapsed into one of the ugliest divorce battles New York had ever seen. Accusations flew in both directions. His wife accused him of violence and cruelty. Stokes accused her of infidelity. In court, she made a claim so bizarre that it stunned everyone listening. She said their apartment was unlivable because Stokes kept dozens of chickens in the kitchen. The image was almost tragic. The man who once ran a rooftop farm had retreated inward, clinging to his old dream in a smaller, sadder form. Former wives testified. Lawyers grew rich. Newspapers feasted on every detail. Stokes spent enormous sums fighting the case, but in the end, the court ruled against him. Exhausted and defeated, he left the Ansonia and moved into a nearby townhouse. In May of 1926, he died of pneumonia just days before his birthday. He left behind a fortune that quickly vanished under legal fees and debt. The Ansonia passed to his son, who had neither the vision nor the discipline to manage it. The building began to decline. Restaurants closed. The great kitchens went dark. The grand rooms fell silent. Apartments were chopped into smaller units. During the Second World War, decorative ironwork was removed and melted down for scrap. Piece by piece, the palace was stripped. By the late 1940s, the building changed hands repeatedly. Each owner took what profit they could and invested nothing in repairs. Eventually, it sold for almost nothing. The roof leaked, paint peeled, the lobby fountain sat dry. Hallways that once echoed with music were dim and neglected. The Ansonia became a shadow of itself. A new owner saw only an opportunity to tear it down. He planned a modern tower in its place, but he underestimated the people who lived there. They were musicians, artists, teachers, and performers. They loved the space, the light, the acoustics. They had endured years of decay, but they would not watch their home be destroyed. When demolition was threatened, the residents organized. The building that had once sheltered the muses was about to be saved by them. 25,000 voices. The fight to save the Ansonia was led by a man named Harry Garland, a voice teacher who had lived and worked in the building for decades. From his apartment, Garland trained singers who went on to perform on Broadway and at the Metropolitan Opera. Some became famous. More importantly, Garland understood something that developers and landlords did not. For artists, the Ansonia was not just a place to live. It was a rare environment where music was welcomed, not tolerated. Singers could rehearse at any hour. Pianists could practice without fear of complaints. Creativity was part of daily life. When Jacob Starr announced his plan to tear the building down, Garland knew that angry letters and lawsuits would not stop him. Starr had ignored those tactics for years. If the Ansonia was going to survive, it had to become untouchable. Garland turned to the city's landmarks law. If the Ansonia could be officially recognized as a historic landmark, demolition would be illegal. The building's exterior would be protected forever. Starr could threaten all he wanted, but he would never be able to tear it down. In 1968, Garland helped create the Ansonia Residents Association and began organizing his neighbors. Their goal was clear and focused: convince the Landmarks Preservation Commission that this building mattered. On April 28, 1970, the commission held a public hearing. The room overflowed with tenants and supporters. One by one, residents stood and told the story of the Ansonia. They spoke about opera legends, baseball heroes, scandals, secrets, and decades of cultural history contained within those walls. Then Starr's lawyer stood up and dismissed it all. He claimed the building was not architecturally important. He said neither he nor the owner were aware of anything historically significant about it. The statement stunned the room. A structure that dominated Broadway, studied by architects and admired for generations, was being described as ordinary. The commission took everything under review and said nothing more. Months passed. No decision came. Garland refused to wait. If the commission would not act, he would make sure the city noticed. In October of 1971, the tenants launched a massive campaign. They spread out across the Upper West Side with clipboards and petitions. They knocked on doors. They stopped people on the street. They explained why the building mattered and asked for support. The response shocked them. People signed eagerly. Many had never been inside the Ansonia, but they passed it every day and could not imagine Broadway without it. By the end of the week, more than 25,000 people had signed the petition. The opposition managed to collect just 11 signatures. For the final act, Garland and the residents organized something no one had seen before. They closed 73rd Street with a city permit, built a stage in the middle of the road, and hosted a free concert. For 5 hours, musicians who lived in the Ansonia performed beneath its ornate facade. Singers trained by Garland took the stage. Longtime residents shared their talents. Crowds filled the street. Cameras rolled. The message was unmistakable. This was not just a building. It was a living part of the city's culture. Support grew. Congresswoman Bella Abzug publicly backed the cause. Mayor John Lindsay added his voice. Finally, on March 14, 1972, the Landmarks Preservation Commission announced its decision. The exterior of the Ansonia Hotel was officially designated a New York City landmark. The commission described it as a symbol of elegance and joy, a building whose presence shaped the skyline itself. Jacob Starr had lost. The wrecking ball would never come. But the victory was incomplete. Only the exterior was protected. The inside of the building remained under Starr's control. Furious and defeated, he refused to spend another dollar on maintenance. When he died, his will made his bitterness permanent. Money from his trust was forbidden from being used to repair or improve the Ansonia. The residents had won the battle, but the struggle to restore the building was far from over.
The survivors. Real change began in 1978, when a real estate investor named Jesse Cranes bought the Ansonia with a group of partners. Where others saw decay, they saw potential. They borrowed millions and began restoring the building piece by piece. The basement was their first challenge. Over the years, the space that once held the world's largest indoor swimming pool had been transformed into something very different. A bathhouse had operated there in the early 1970s, launching the career of a young performer who later became a superstar. After that, a Notorious nightclub moved in. Cranes paid a fortune just to remove it. No bank would finance a building with that kind of tenant. Once the basement was cleared, the real work began. But the same tenants who had fought to save the building from demolition now fought the new owner in court. Rent strikes followed, lawsuits multiplied. The Ansonia became the most legally contested residential building in New York. One judge was assigned full-time just to handle its cases. Still, Cranes kept going. He repaired the roof, restored the exterior, upgraded electrical systems, and eventually realized that the only way forward was to turn the building into condominiums. After years of negotiation, a deal was reached. Longtime residents could buy their apartments at far below market prices. Some could not afford even the discount, but enough agreed to make the plan work. In 1992, the conversion was completed. The Ansonia became a condominium with more than 400 apartments. Today, the building stands as one of the most recognizable landmarks on the Upper West Side. Locals call it the wedding cake of Broadway because of its elaborate design. Apartments sell for millions. Inside, traces of its past remain. Rounded rooms, high ceilings, decorative floors, and unusual layouts. The rooftop is now landscaped. A parking garage occupies the basement, but the building's soul endures.
More than a century after it was built, the Ansonia remains standing because it refused to disappear. William Earl Dodge Stokes was a difficult, reckless, and deeply flawed man. He dreamed too big. He spent too much. He lived chaotically. But he understood something essential. A building could be more than shelter. It could be a world. The Ansonia was never just an address. It was an idea. It has seen everything: fame and disgrace, genius and madness, triumph and collapse. It has housed opera legends and baseball gods, criminals and visionaries. It has been a palace, a slum, a scandal, and a landmark. And through it all, it has survived. The next time you walk up Broadway and see that ornate facade rising into the sky, remember what you were looking at. You are looking at an impossible dream made real. You are looking at a survivor. You are looking at the Ansonia, the cursed palace of Broadway, still standing, still alive, still adding chapters.